G'day mates, it's B-Buster here, and I would like to give Best Fiends a huge shout out for sponsoring this episode. So guys, it's finally October, and that means great costumes, late nights, ghost stories, and of course lots of candy. And on that note, if boredom is a bit of a nightmare for you, then I have one more fun way to enjoy the spooky season to the fullest: Best Fiends. Now, Best Fiends is a puzzle game that, once you get started, is infamously impossible to put down. From the quirky character designs creating a fun aesthetic, to the intuitive interface that makes for a really smooth experience. Once you download Best Fiends, boredom, it won't stand a chance. Recently too, I've really enjoyed some of the levels, the puzzles, especially some of the boss levels. And I've actually found myself playing it between recording sessions quite often when I need to rest my voice and take a quick break, which has been a really nice way to play. And I think that that's what I like most about Best Fiends. It is a fantastic boredom quencher, but it's also great for casual gameplay in moments of downtime throughout the day. I also love that more levels, events, challenges are always being added too, so the game never runs out of things to do. The game is free to download and has literally millions of 5-star reviews on the Apple App Store and Google Play. Which really doesn't surprise me, to be honest, because it's just a great little game that always leaves me with that just one more feeling. So, download Best Fiends free today on the Apple App Store or Google Play. That's friends without the R. Best Fiends. So, this is a story that I haven't really told anyone, partly because elements of the story are just not really appropriate in most social situations, and as a result, I've locked this away in my memory and I rarely think about it. Also, as a bit of a disclaimer, I'm completely aware that this story involves me being very stupid and careless. I'm not going to inject these acknowledgements into the story, but rest assured that, in hindsight, I'm aware of the foolishness that took place, and I don't need to be chided on the topic. So, the year was about 1998 to 1999. I was a young gay guy, in my early 20s, living in a medium-sized city in the Midwestern US. This was sort of an in-between, a transitional time for gay people, where, in most populous areas, we had enough respect to live openly, but there were still plenty of people who just didn't like us. It was also well before the invention of smartphones, and the internet was still in the early stages of mass adoption. There were large communities online, but it wasn't yet at the point where most Americans were online. In fact, online socialization consisted of chat rooms hosted by various services like AOL, Yahoo, or IRC servers, and message boards were still used by large numbers of people, but not as much as today. For gay men at that time, though, it was nothing short of revolutionary. Prior to the internet, and to the broader cultural changes, of course, gay men had been stuck looking for fun in secretive and/or shady places due to the inability to freely express ourselves. In the 90s, it was still somewhat risky, but the internet offered a way to talk freely and relatively anonymously, without the risk of being outed or worse. For this reason, too, it really took off in the gay communities, and gay men were a very large part of the user bases for these social platforms. It was suddenly very easy and relatively safe too to find dates, friends, or even just a good time, and it quickly became the norm for a lot of gay men. On the other hand, being such a new communication tool for most people, we were sometimes blind to the risks, I guess you could say. Anyway, being an attractive young man in my prime, I made liberal use of the online communities to find dates. This is to say, I had plenty of hookups. My city had a decent number of chat rooms and personal message boards, and I had mostly great experiences. I met the typical assortment of good guys, closet cases, and a few weirdos too, like you'd expect. It wasn't an absolute hoe by most standards, but suffice it to say that a cute gay guy at that time could generally have a lot more dates than your typical straight person. But at some point during this time, I had some brief chat on a message board with a guy from my city. I forget his screen name, it's been like over 20 years, but let's call him Slim Guy 65. So this back and forth had happened on a general thread in the gay section, not in private message boards or anything, so it was visible to anyone who chose to read the thread. Nothing had come of it, but about a week later I had received an email from an unrecognized address. The email basically said, "Hey, I'm not gay and I don't agree with the gay lifestyle. I'm here because my friend met this guy, Slim Guy 65 person from this message board, and the guy really hurt him. I don't want this to happen to anyone else. My friend tried to tell the police, but they wouldn't do anything. I see that you were talking to Slim Guy 65, so just be careful and stay away from him." Okay, I thought, that's strange. What does this person mean by really hurt him too? Was his heart broken? Did he get beaten up or verbally abused or something? I responded to the email asking for clarification on what exactly happened, but I never really received a response. I must admit too that I was slightly weirded out by it for sure. But on the other hand, it's an anonymous email from someone who doesn't respond and is vague about their warning. This really could be anything, right? It could be some disgruntled ex trying to mess with the guy. It could be a real warning about someone gay bashing or something. It could be someone trolling who doesn't have anything to do with anyone. But I kept it in the back of my mind. Pretty much shrugged it off in the end, but it just still sort of niggled away at me. Several weeks later, though, I had a weekday off work and decided to take to the internet to fish for some, well, you know what, as was my custom. But lo and behold, I had an email response to a personal ad, and it was Slim Guy 65. He was offering to meet at this place to hang out and just have a good time. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. I won't go into the details, of course, but as I recall, there weren't really many details discussed, other than the small talk and intros that we'd done previously. Nothing about this guy was really sounding interesting to me, but I had no other offers on this day, so I decided, well, why not? I'll go see what this dude is about. But as I typed my reply, I suddenly remembered the strange email that I'd received warning about this person. I went back and read it, still vague, still presenting more questions than answers. Should I take this anonymous warning at face value and just ignore this guy? I decided to go check him out anyway. His address was on a rather busy street in the middle of a dense residential area, not some back-of-the-woods shack or something, and I could handle myself. I thought to myself that if he's weird, then I can just get out of there. But before long, I arrived at the house at the agreed time. It was a duplex-style house with one apartment on the ground floor and one on the second floor, a part of a row of several identical duplexes. It was the middle of the afternoon by the time that I got there, and there was plenty of traffic on the street and the occasional person out on their porch or in their backyard. I pulled up to the driveway to the parking area behind the house, got out and knocked on the door. The guy that answered was a pretty normal, kind of mousy-looking man, but probably in his late 40s. Slight, slim build, soft-spoken, looked like any guy working in an office, a cubicle maybe somewhere. Not really my type, but honestly, my curiosity was piqued, and I had nothing better to do anyway, so I stepped inside to take a look around and gauge the situation. With the warning email fresh in my mind, of course. I stepped into the back door, into the kitchen. It was very clean, and there was nothing out on the counters, and no table and chairs, or anything. This is to say that it didn't look like somebody was living there, to be honest. It looked like it had been kept up and cleaned, but for the most part it looked empty. Looking out into the apartment, I could see that it was not set up as a living space. A large window with sliding glass was between the kitchen and the living room, and I could see what looked like a large table out in the living room area. And then SG65 said something like, "This isn't where I live. A friend of mine used to run a doctor's office here, and I maintain the building for him. It's private though, and we have the place to ourselves." Which I know was a bit weird, but okay, I guess. He shut the back door and locked it, with a keyed deadbolt, the kind that you need a key to open, even from the inside, and put his key back into his pocket saying, "So what do you want to do?" Upon seeing this too, my danger sense definitely spiked. This is not a normal home, and why was he locking the door like that? It's not necessarily suspect, I suppose. A lot of people have that sort of lock on their door, and the door actually has a window too, so it even made some sense, I suppose. But still, something just wasn't right here, and I could tell, but now I was locked in. I asked him straight up too why he was locking the door like that, which immediately flustered him. He was looking rather nervous, and
His voice was a little wavery and halting, not quite stuttering, but almost, I suppose. He said, well, we don't want someone to come in and interrupt us, right? Flashing a weak and unconvincing smile. His demeanor and body language were all I needed to confirm that this guy was definitely up to no good, or at least there was something that he was hiding. However, I could tell that I was intimidating him. I was not a particularly muscular kid or anything, but I had a pretty large frame. Like, even when I'm at my very thinnest, I still wear large-sized tops and 36 waist pants, so I look pretty big, which people tend to interpret as me being stronger than I probably really am. Also, I am definitely not a tough guy at all, but I have a resting facial expression that makes me look like a bit of a thug, I suppose. In fact, people who don't know me often assume that I'm rough or something. I sometimes use this to my advantage too while I can because, well, before long a new acquaintance will eventually figure out that I'm a total wimp. But this was definitely an occasion to play up the tough guy appearance, and I did exactly that. I put my best steely face on and I told him to unlock the door and that I didn't want to be locked in here like this. He looked for a moment like he was going to pee his pants, and then he said, "Okay, alright, I'll unlock this." And he unlocked the deadbolt. And then, "I'll just lock the knob here, okay?" He turned the little dial that locks the doorknob. That was fine with me, to be honest. I continued to stare at him until he said, "I'll leave the keys on the counter right here." And he set the keys down near the sink. I was relatively satisfied with this answer, to be honest. At this point, though, my adrenaline was definitely flowing. I was almost in full flight or fight mode, but I was kind of stuck in place. The guy was now between me and the door, though, and I was freaked out, but this little weasel didn't appear to pose any immediate physical threat to me. I could tell that his pants pockets were empty too, and that I was intimidating him now. But still, I didn't know exactly what to do. Now, keep in mind that despite my wordy descriptions, this all happened very quickly, without any real sort of long pauses. It had only been maybe 1 or 2 minutes since I'd stepped into the door by this point, and this all happened at the pace of a conversation. I was obviously nervous and trying not to appear so. He said, "Well, let's go in," and walked a wide path around me through the kitchen into what would normally be the living room, and toward the hall to the right from there. I was familiar with this floor layout. It's pretty common in this area. The hallway would lead up to 2 small bedrooms, with a bathroom in between them. But I sort of hesitated, thinking that I should just walk out that back door and take off. But really, now I was super curious. I mean, I knew there was no way in heck that I'm doing anything with this guy at this point, but I kind of want to see what's going on in here. Also, I was pretty confident that I could take him if it came to a fight, so I slowly headed toward the living room. I remember it feeling like I was walking in slow motion, and from the kitchen entrance I could see large rectangular stainless steel tables taking up a lot of the living room. I remember thinking too that this looks a lot like a surgical table. In fact, it looked like it could rise and tilt, and it also had a recessed channel running all the way around the edge. In hindsight, I now know what that was. It was 100% a mortician's table. The dude had a mortician's table in there. But at that time, I just thought like it looked like a weird medical table of some sort. There were some other office-typey sort of cabinets too and stuff around, I think, but now all I really remember is that table in that room. And then I noticed that the large front window looking out onto the street was covered by vertical blinds that were closed. SG65 said something like, "This used to be a doctor's office. Like I said, come on back here." The hallway revealed the room setup that I expected. The first bedroom was closed. The second bedroom was open to a small, very clean bathroom. At the end of the hall was the other bedroom, which looked like, if the doctor's office story was true, had at one time been converted to an exam room. He said, "We can go into that room if you want. Go ahead, take a look." And he stayed by the other closed bedroom door. The back bedroom door was open, and I could see that the walls were covered in a sort of honey-coloured wood paneling, the type you might see in a den or an office that hasn't been updated since like the 1970s. I slowly took a few steps down to that door, trying to be very aware of what Mr. Creepy was doing behind me, but he didn't move. When I got up to that room, though, the first thing that I noticed was the door had a sort of key deadbolt lock, like the back door. But this room, it locked from the outside. I wondered if there was a lever on the inside or something, but I pretty much knew the answer to that question without needing to check, because I also saw a chair, a non-swiveling plastic desk chair with sort of thin metal legs sitting near the center of the room. The room had old dark carpet and those wood-paneled walls, like I mentioned. And I noticed that the walls were completely paneled with no windows. And I know that the room had at least one window, probably two, so whoever did that paneling went over those windows for sure. And there was also a phone in there plugged in and sitting on the floor. It was an old office phone, probably from around the 80s or early 90s, dingy sort of beige plastic with several buttons to manage different phone lines, just sitting on the carpet near the wall, with the chair at a slight distance facing the phone. And apart from that, there was nothing else in that room. I was sort of standing at the threshold of the room with one foot slightly in, absolutely not going past that door. And I looked back at the dude. He was still standing by the other door, just nervously smiling at me, trying hard to look casual, I suppose, but obviously very nervous. Or something. He said something like, "Well, what do you want to do?" But instead of answering, I felt around the backside of the deadbolt lock, and sure enough, there was nothing there but the smooth wood of the door. It also dawned on me that I didn't see a light switch anywhere for the ceiling lamp. And where was the switch? Who knows? It should have been just inside the door, of course, but that original switch was covered up by the paneling now. He mumbled something about not having the key to that lock. Don't worry about it. I turned back to face the guy and just said, "What is it that you want to do here?" My skin had gone ice cold at this point as I realized that I was way too far into this apartment. In fact, it was at this point that I was running through my options in my head. What was this guy going to do? He doesn't appear to have any weapon or anything in reach, but who knows what goes on in this place? And what are you trying to do? That last part too I actually said out loud, and he was almost totally derailed by that. He stammered out, some hot man-to-man's fun stuff, with the weakest smile that I've ever seen, looking like he was just a hair's breadth away from fully panicking. I know too that it sounds a bit comical, but really at that time, that sentence was probably the most chilling part of the entire experience for me. It was just the way that he said it, like he had come up with something on the fly, like something that would sound plausible, but yet he failed. And I mean, who says that in real life? Hey, do you want to have some hot man-to-man fun? Nobody, right? It's sort of like something you might say for a cheesy advertisement for an inappropriate site or something like that. Some hot man-to-man fun. Gross, right? Anyway, that was it. I said to him, "No, I just want to go and I'm leaving." And he said, "Okay." I quickly walked past him as he flattened himself against the wall to avoid me, and I noped right out of that living room dissection area and through the kitchen to the back door, which thankfully still had not been deadbolted. The keys were still on the counter, and I let myself out the door, and I didn't bother closing that, as I saw him slowly coming to the door behind me. I deliberately walked out, not ran, to my car, and looking back at the building, I can see that, indeed, there was actually a window facing the backyard area from that panelled room, but of course it was covered up from the inside. And the dude was shutting and locking the back door. Truthfully, in the end too, I left with my heart pounding, my skin icy cold, my heart in my throat, thinking, what the heck was that? So, was this guy some kind of a killer, or was he just an awkward closeted gay guy with access to a sterile-looking apartment with an autopsy mortuary table and a windowless room that looks from the outside, with a chair and a phone and no light switch? It's clear to me that the poor soul who walks into that room probably gets locked in there, and then he shuts off the light from somewhere and calls the phone. But other than that, it's anyone's guess what actually happens. I assume that the friend of the judgmental person who emailed me must have been some kid that got locked in there for whatever game ensues. But driving home, at first I thought, of course I have to call the police and tell them what's in this place. But thinking it through, I realized that I didn't really have any crime to tell them about. I mean, what do I say? I went to meet a man for some casual fun, and what? I mean, he has a room with a chair in it. He has, as I thought at the time, an exam table. The police aren't going to do anything with that story. The guy didn't touch me or do anything to me, and in the end, I just left. I considered calling an anonymous tip line, but again, what exactly would I report? There was no actionable crime, and also keep in mind that at that time, while the local police in the city were pretty decent, they weren't especially interested in getting involved with helping gays. They'd prosecute actual crimes if it was cut and dry, of course, but I'd heard plenty of accounts of them not choosing to follow up on cases where there was not an easy arrest to be made. And so, in the end, I decided not to report anything because nothing would come of it, except perhaps drawing unwanted attention to myself. And you know what? Even in retrospect, I honestly think that was probably the most rational choice to make. If this happened today in 2020, the law enforcement would probably be a lot more interested in it, but back then, not so much. And so, live and learn, right? I still drove past that house once in a while in the normal course of life for like several years, and I'd always pay attention to how it looked. The vertical blinds were closed for maybe 5 or 6 years whenever I went past, and then eventually the blinds were down and there were decorative curtains in the window, so I assumed that the place was eventually sold to someone who actually lived in it. But around 2002, maybe 2003, there was actually a murder of a young guy on the news. He'd been found in the next state, which borders on my city. It's not very far away. I recognized the guy from the gay community too, but didn't know him personally. And a friend mentioned to me something about this local serial killer. I said, "What?" And he explained that a few young men had gone missing over the past year, each after being at one specific dive bar, and each being found several miles to the north past the state line, and also out in the country. And the case on the news actually matched up with that MO. My friend told me that the young guy had been at that bar and left with someone the night that he disappeared, and the news report didn't mention anything about a gay bar or similar recent cases, of course, but I had to wonder if my acquaintance from the internet had something to do with it. The location of the murders apparently were nowhere near that duplex, at least according to the story that I was told, but I never heard of a resolution to that murder on the news or any official mention of a suspected serial killer, other than some gossip, of course. And so, in the end, I just left scratching my head. So I used to be naively helpful to all sorts of strangers, and even often picked up hitchhikers, solo and in groups, and get them where they needed to go. When I was 19, I moved to Huntington, a college town in West Virginia, and I worked at a popular bar at the time. My shifts would start around 9 p.m. and end at about 2 a.m. I didn't really know anybody in this town, or state even, and I'd been there on my own for only a month or so at this stage. So on one of these nights, one of the customers had taken an interest in conversing with me while I was working my shift. Me, being a good employee, conversed pleasantly back. He was in his 30s or 40s, buzzed white hair with a group of other guys, all of them tattooed with leather jackets. Nothing against leather or tattoos, I have and wear both in fact, just giving a visual detail. Now, he'd been there going back and forth between them at their table and me at the bar, pretty much talking to me non-stop for a good couple of hours. Around 1:30 a.m. he mentions that he doesn't know where his friends went. I look up, oblivious, and see the whole bar had virtually cleared out. He was right though, not one of his buddies was in sight. He says that they must have all gotten drunk and just forgot about him, leaving him there. The man is clearly bummed and quite concerned because, as he tells me, He lives almost an hour away from here and has no way of getting home now, and it's the middle of winter, so it's snowing pretty hard. He spends the next few minutes on the phone calling different friends that were at the bar with him, but no one is answering. He's pretty clearly screwed, and I can't leave him in the bar. I can't in good conscience leave the man out in the snow either. So, fuck. Now I've got to drive this stranger home in a place that I'm unfamiliar with, in conditions that I've never really driven in before. No snow in my home state. I tell him don't worry though, and when I finish clearing the bar and closing up, I'll take him home. And I do. We get in the car and he gives me directions as we go. We're talking casually like we had been for quite some time. Just some superficial conversation. Nothing even hinting at sexual or flirty. I'm not a flirty person at the best of times, so I'm positive that there was no misunderstanding here either. Keep in mind too, it's like 2 a.m. No one knows where I am, or that I'm with this rando, and it's snowing heavily now. And as we're chatting, I suddenly feel this hand on the back of my neck. It was such an unpleasant feeling. It was truly such an unpleasant feeling. I remember his fingers swirling in the little hairs at the bottom of my hairline, which were too short to make into sort of a ponytail. Ugh. I scrunched my neck though and just calmly said, "I have a knife," as I kept looking forward, driving. The swirling ceased, but the hand lingered on my skin. Again, calmly but more firmly, I said, "I have a knife." He removed his hand and we kept driving. I figured whatever that was is handled and we get back to our conversation. Minutes later, though, I feel his hand fully against the back of my neck again, his fingers wrapped gently around its curve. I scrunched my neck again and said, "Seriously, I have a knife." He removed his hand once more, and then, in a very hurt tone, he said, "Are you really scared of me?" After that, he kept his hands to himself, and it was a long 1-hour drive. But I did get him home, and after that I took off. I'm 29 now, and it wasn't until many years later did it occur to me the whole thing was probably a setup that he and his friends had planned. They probably left him stranded, so that the chick that he's been talking to all night will have to take him home, opening the door for sex, consensual, or maybe not. I guess the moral of the story here is, don't let people you don't know into your car. Oh, and also, always carry a knife. This happened at a large shopping centre in Adelaide, South Australia, a couple of months ago. But for some context too, it was around 7 p.m. on a late trading night, already completely dark outside. So, I was shopping with my partner and she went into a clothing store, both to make some returns and also try on some replacement clothes. I knew that it was going to take a little bit of time and I'm not overly interested in women's clothing, so I stood outside in the very busy centre and was responding to some work emails on my phone, paying very little attention to all of the people walking past. After about 5 minutes, I was approached by a fairly young-looking gentleman, early to mid-20s at most, I'm 23 myself, with a very strong European accent, possibly French, who said to me something along the lines of, "You were with a girl, yes? She was looking for you. She came up to me, I think, because we are wearing similar shirts and thought you were me." Thinking back at it, other than buttons on our shirts, they were not really similar at all. But he told me that he was trying to find me and made it seem like something was wrong, and insisted that he could show me where she went. I looked into the store and couldn't see my partner. It was a fairly small clothing store inside the centre. You could see all of it from outside, in fact. I found out later, too, that she was just in a changing room. But I was extremely confused at the time. My partner knows that I would just be aimlessly pacing in circles outside as I do when I'm reading emails, and would never walk off looking for me, not to mention that she could have just texted or called. Although confused, he was moving away fast enough that I didn't have time to ask many questions, and not being able to see my partner convinced me to at least follow where he was going. There had to have been hundreds of people around, so I wasn't very worried for my own well-being. And as I followed the gentleman, I was leaving a good 2 or so meters between us, walking behind. I don't remember feeling overly unsafe or concerned about being near him, just extremely confused and kind of unsure, I suppose. He could see that and kept repeating something along the lines of, This isn't a joke. Please believe me. I want to help. Come with me. She went this way. I saw where she went. We'd only been walking for about 10 seconds at this point, but covering a fair bit of distance from the store that I was originally at. I said something like, "Where was she going? What did she say to you?" And he told me, "Sorry, my English isn't very good. She's this way." We kept walking like this for another 10 seconds before we reached the doors to the building. We were on a side of the centre that has doors leading to both a car park and a large loading dock for one of the supermarkets. Although busy in the centre, there was almost no one around the doors going in or out. And he walked straight outside and said something along the lines of, "She was sitting just on this bench. I don't know where she went." Other than a small bit of light under the cover where a bench is, it was completely dark as soon as you walked any further away. I walked up to the point where the automatic doors opened, but no further, and looked, 1 foot outside, 1 foot inside. And he said something like, "She must have walked this way. Come, I'll help you find her." And started to walk left, which only leads to a dark and secluded loading dock, not visible from the doors. You could tell the urgency that he was trying to convey to follow him now, though, and I was already very confused and unsure up until that point. But as soon as it happened, I knew that whatever he wanted me to follow him down there for wasn't going to be good. It was one of those moments where you piece it all together finally, and realized how many warning signs you somewhat noticed but ignored, and I instantly felt like I was in danger. I remember saying, "All good, thank you, I'll call her," and just turning straight around and walking back inside. I turned around after a few seconds and couldn't see him outside anymore. Although it felt like a long time, all of this must have transpired in about, maybe 45 seconds from when he first started talking to me. And it was at this point that I texted my partner, who let me know that she was still at the same store that I last saw her at. At the time, I said to her that I think I may have almost been abducted. A bit over the top, I know, especially for a fairly large 20-year-old bloke like I am. I'm assuming, though, that if I'd gone down there, I was probably going to get robbed. I'm glad, though, that I'll hopefully never know. I went straight to Center Security, though, and I did report it. They took some details of where and when it happened, but didn't seem overly concerned. But anyway, be careful out there, guys, because you just never know who may cross your path one day.